KLUTCHDWD3 at the Garden of Eden, held at the Garden of Eden, at the Garden of Eden, held at the Garden of Eden, at the Garden of Eden, held at the Garden of Eden. What she doing there? Ain't she supposed to be on some Stegosaurus or brown and horse carriage that you selling? All kinds of things and antlers I scraped off. I must have been out for the evening. What you mean she thought I was cheating? What could you possibly be whispering, Satan? What am I supposed to do it with other animals? I don't think so. That's friendships and family members. I ain't disgusting like your heritage is, Mr. Satan Snake. Slithering out of the woods, I hunt you for a purpose and food, and I caught you in my net in a bear trap, and you got sliced your tail, and you're squirmingly like an Earth Prophecy's worm, but your millennium shined out because you in the Garden of Eden. You at the Garden of Eden. Held at the Garden of Eden, you at the Garden of Eden, you held at the Garden of Eden, you at the Garden of Eden, you held at the Garden of Eden, you at the Garden of Eden, you held at the Garden of Eden. Double barrel pizza, what? I'm not allowed to eat that? Yeah, right. How come I am? It's not from the apple tree of disgusting bad fruit. Must have had black clouds over it that was giving you a hazy rainfall. So how could you possibly take a hit of the wrong indigo or wrong type of fruit that was sliced off the tree? It's impossible. I think something's wrong with your Babylonian scriptures, and your federal agents need better horrendous Hindu or Buddhism that you believe in, cause you're atheist. So that male and species created themselves off of apes. Well, where'd they land from? Bugs and dragons? Dinosaurs got wiped out in the Garden of Eden, cause you at the Garden of Eden. Held at the Garden of Eden. You at the Garden of Eden. You held at the Garden of Eden. You at the Garden of Eden. You held at the Garden of Eden. You at the Garden of Eden. You held at the Garden of Eden. You at the Garden of Eden. You held at the Garden of Eden. Tigers and bears and cavions. There are so many menus that you do not choose your landings very well. You are my claymores and spider web. You wrapped up in those cocoons. Ba-boom. I love you and love some more. So let's get down on that disorder of an upload. Cause you're at the Garden of Eden.